Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Tech Tuesday. Like every Tuesday, we have a topical issue that we are going to talk about. One issue that we have talked about, it has come up in previous conversation, is as a person who usually goes home in a village, usually I do have challenges, especially when we have sessions like this or when I have to go live. And it's not, coming from a village, that it kind of disconnects me from the rest of the world when I'm home, when I'm trying to work and I have this unstable network or I freeze when I'm having these conversations with everybody. And today we have a very special guest, Mr Paseka Maleka from ICASA. And a little bit, we want to talk about equal access with him. And that, whether I am like currently right now, like I'm in Durban, I should not have challenges when I'm in Dinokana. I should have the same, access that I have, in Dinokana that I have in Durban, or when I'm in Joburg. I should still have the same kind of access that I have, whether I'm in the middle of Matatiele or whether I am in Gamothapo. It should not be any difference. And that is the basis, basically, from my understanding, what is equal access. But that being said, welcome, Tate Paseka, to this conversation.
Thank you so
Uh,
much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for even agreeing. Tate Maleka, maybe you can just introduce yourself a little bit, although I didn't mention that you are from ICAS, but can you kindly just introduce yourself so that we can have the conversation?
Okay, thank you, Karabo. My name is Paseka Maleka. I work at ICASA as a communications manager and also a delegated spokesperson for the organization. So that's who I am, and that's what I do at ICASA. I'm a sort of a communication specialist of some sort. Yeah, that's the long and short of it. I deal with a number of issues within ICASA. I know end to end, because when you're a communicator, you need to know everything that's happening in an organization. So that's what I do on a daily basis.
Okay. Thank you very much that you know end to end of the organization. That being said, and that Maleka, what does it mean when, I mentioned my interpretation of equal access, but what is ICASA's interpretation or that definition of equal access? I think we have a network challenge, but we'll just wait a little while and wait for Ntate Maleka to come back on, as we just wait for him to just come back. Oh, okay. My sincerest apologies. I guess the conversation is really necessary where we're talking about, equal access. I'm just going to wait for him to come back live again, that we can talk about this because, fortunately, unfortunately, that becomes our conversation. Yes. Tate Maleka, you can go ahead.
Yeah, Karabo, I didn't hear you. I was
Oh,
losing you some, but
okay.
anyway,
Oh,
something called we believe that there is more equitability than equal access. This is so because a lot of people do not have access to communication services, depending on where the person is. Someone in Gauteng, they have better services than the person
My sincerest apologies. Mr Maleka is struggling with network, as we know, and usually when we're hit by load shedding, this usually happens. But I'm just hoping that his network will improve in a short while.
I can hear you clearly. I'm not sure if you can hear
Mm.
me.
Now I can hear you. You were gone. The whole explanation, nothing besides, just bits and, cutting. But you can please proceed.
Okay, now what we are saying is that we believe as ICASA that there is more equitable access than there is equal access, in a sense that we live in different areas and we may not have the same access that other people do have. Like, for instance, someone in Gauteng may have no difficulty in connecting, but there is access. And then somebody else in somewhere in the Nogana, somewhere in the northwest, may not be able to have um, they may not be able to have all the access that someone in Gauteng has. That's what I'm trying to say. So there's issues around dropped calls where someone in Gauteng, we may not experience a lot of drop calls, but in those far-flung areas, they may be experiencing a lot of drop calls due to network instability and stuff like that. So those are the things that made us believe that we believe that there is equitable access more than equal access because people live in different areas and they may not have the same service, even though the service is there.
Okay. You've just mentioned the part where, as you're saying, we can have equitable but not equal access. And, and what is causing, as you said, they may not have the same access. What is causing rural communities to still struggle with connectivity while, urban areas are getting faster connectivity and better connectivity in time? And as you mentioned, people in villages, we do not know what it feels like to have uninterrupted access to the internet or connectivity. So what is causing this actually?
You know, the biggest challenge is that a lot of these network operators have basically have put in a lot of infrastructures in these metropolitan areas, in these urban areas, because they believe that is where the money is. And they start to neglect people in far-flung areas, in villages, in rural areas. And then that's where the challenge is. And when we engage with them previously, they used to tell us that no, it's because they do not have a lot of or enough spectrum to cover everyone in all the areas. So right now we're talking a different story now because now we've recently auctioned spectrum to them. So we expect now that they should be able to roll out services in all those far-flung areas because now they do have access to the spectrum, which they didn't have before. So they used to prioritize where they want to put in the infrastructure and all that. So, but right now, we believe that as time goes on, we will be able to see the changes happening in the rural areas and villages.
Okay. You've just mentioned you auctioned off the spectrum recently. And the last one before the one that was, I think it was done this year, the one that was auctioned off this year. So there was a 6-year gap between. What was the reasons for the 6-year gap?
Okay. It's been a long ride for ICASA to license the spectrum. We tried in 2011, and
Mm.
it's not just yes, it's actually more than that. We tried in 2011, but we couldn't continue with the process because we were taken to court by some network operators, which ultimately the process was halted, and then that also included the finalization of the policies. And then in 2016, we started the licensing process again, which was also halted through litigation by the former Minister of Telecommunications and Postal Services, and an interdict was issued against the ICASA. And then, but of course, we reached the settlement in 2018 with the minister, and then we started a new process again in 2020, and the authority initiated that process. However, that was also disturbed by another litigation from another service provider, which raised several issues, including but not limited to competition issues, the duopoly of other network operators, and all that. So we tried that, but ultimately we ended up issuing an ITA, an invitation to apply, in 2021, and right now we were able to license the spectrum. So you will see that even though ICASA has always been ready to license the spectrum, there has been some disturbances in terms of litigation, which as a regulator, we know that we operate in a fluid and volatile environment where litigation is just imminent at any point in time. So, but anyway, that doesn't stop us from proceeding with our processes to ensure that we regulate in the public interest and South Africans are able to have access to communication services at affordable prices.
Okay. You mentioned affordable prices, and we rank 136 in terms of affordability in the world on the countries that were actually done. And on the other hand, we have such high unemployment in the country. How does ICASA balance this, or make sure that the regulators, or I mean, the service providers come on board and realize, the challenges that we have as a country if we are like 136, in terms of affordability, and we have some, one of the most unequal and, and with high levels of unemployment. How do we balance that and make sure that access is affordable for the general public?
Well, South Africa's ranking in relation to the cost of mobile data will soon change following the successful auction of the spectrum. The reason the spectrum ranked, or the country ranked this high, was probably the delay around the spectrum auction. That's one. And secondly, some of these countries which we are referring to, which we are being compared with, had already licensed the spectrum and introduced multiple players who in turn promoted or increased competition in those areas. And with competition, prices go down. So, and what is important to note is that at some point, our network providers were using spectrum which they used for voice services, and they used that spectrum to roll out broadband services due to lack of access to high demand spectrum. So we believe that now that the spectrum has been awarded, there are obligations attached to the licensees, or to the licenses themselves, to ensure that South Africans have access to services at affordable prices. So we must also understand that fact that even though the prices might be too high in South Africa, but compared to other countries, those countries might have, some of them have licensed spectrum before, so they do have multiple players. So in South Africa now, there's another process that we are going to enter into, what we call the wireless open access network. We are going to license that wireless open access network to compete with the services or with the other licenses that are currently operating in the country. So we expect that if we introduce those kind of competitions, and then we should be able to go down, and then as a country we should be able to rank a little bit better compared to other countries.
Okay, you mentioned that we have auctioned this and we're expecting our prices to go down. Estimately, when can we expect this?
Well, the new licenses for the spectrum that has recently been auctioned are kicking off on the 1st of July. So meaning that everyone who has made a bid and were able to be awarded the spectrum will now get the spectrum. They will start deploying infrastructure, utilize that spectrum, and deploy a lot of base stations for South Africans to have access. I mean, now we are talking 5G, we are talking new technologies now, and the fact that we still under the COVID pandemic, it's also important because people are still working from home. They need a lot of data. They need access to services. So with the new regime that is coming, I might call it the regime, but yes, with what is coming right now, we expect as the authority to see the difference in services that we receive as consumers. Because I mean, if network operators previously were saying we can't roll out the services because we don't have the spectrum, they've always been saying that. Maybe they thought this day will not come where now they have access to the spectrum. So it's here, it's there now. So it has been awarded to them. So the situation must change. The data cost must go down, and South Africans must have access to wide range of services, and those services must be at affordable prices.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm a bit worried about that. That I know as at 2020, when ICASA, published that if you are working with a service provider, I mean, you are using data and then you buy it month to month, it should not expire at the end of the month. It should actually, go into the next month. And what worries me is that it is there, it's in black and white, it was, programmated, but that is still not being implemented by, our service providers. Would then they actually see it necessary for them, or would there be any consequences when the prices don't go down, when we don't see more competitiveness in the space?
There is always consequences for contravening the regulations. Our people must also learn to to start lodging complaints with ICASA if they don't get the best service that they pay for. And but in most cases, what we do is we encourage our the consumers to go and try and address the issue with the network provider first before they come to us. And then once they have exhausted all the avenues, they can't get the response, they can come to us, and then we'll take the matter up with the network provider and make sure that the consumer is get some form of redress of some sort. So with the whole issue of data expiring, we published the regulations around 2018, 2019. So those regulations, yes, they meant that data should not expire. It can be transferred, it can be rolled over, and all those issues that we came up with. But now, unfortunately, one of the things that we did not do as the authority was to prescribe the timelines for that data not to expire. We didn't do that at the time. So a lot of consumers had complaints. Civil society organizations complained as well to say, but these network operators are not allowing us to transfer the data, or they're not allowing us to roll over our data. If they do, it will only be for a month, and then it gets depleted. Okay, not necessarily depleted, but it expires after that. So what do we do? Because ICASA tried to intervene, but it seems like this intervention didn't actually work. So what we have done right now, we have published the review of the regulations, the draft regulations in that regard. Now, one of the things that we are proposing, especially when it comes to issues of data, SMS, and voice services, we are proposing that if somebody has bought data and they're not using it, they're using a little bit of it and it still remains, it can't expire at least for 6 months. So somebody must have that data, or that those SMSs, or that voice minutes. They still have, if they are not using them, they must remain with them for at least 6 months period for them to use whatever that they have bought. So those are some of the things that we are proposing out there. So that process is open now for consultation with anyone who's got interest. So we therefore encourage all consumer groups, all stakeholders, all interested parties to participate in this process and make sure that they have their views known to ICASA. Because we know for sure that the network operators will come, make submissions in support of what they want, but now we require other voices as well from various sectors of the society to come out and say, this is our views, these are our views, and then we believe that we can do better, and whatever that they can put to us. And then ICASA will be able to take an informed decision, having balance. Because we know operators will say things that will benefit them commercially. That is a fact because they are running businesses. But now consumers also need the service, and that service must be affordable. And they expect to have the. In fact, consumers don't expect that data to expire at all. So our intervention is now, let's allow it for 6 months, and then if they don't use it for 6 months, then it's something else. But at least somebody is able to have their what they have bought, their savings for that long.
Okay, thank you very much. I will make sure that also I do share the link for that participation also. And personally, I know I'm going to make a submission because I was like, but I know I saw the regulations. Why is this happening month to month?
Mm.
And sometimes you don't have that information to say, Yes, you are right. It's not supposed to be happening. And while we're talking about that, earlier on we were talking about the blackouts, and it did affect you earlier on with the with the network being unstable. And personally, I believe that the fact that when we have what you call them these load shedding episodes, South Africa is synonymous with load shedding. And reality is that this is not going to be resolved next week or next year. They say it's going to be a long-term process. But how is ICASA dealing with this? Because we lose network during these loading blackouts. We literally have a blackout network-wise, and and electricity. And for me, I see it as a great um, 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 a security risk. It might not seem it that way, but if you can't make calls, nobody has landlines anymore. I hardly have landlines. We see what happens every day. People are being arrested almost on a daily for stealing, copper wires and everything. So, what is ICASA doing? What is the intervention to ensure that we have some form of a backup, or actually even with the service providers, they actually provide a solution so that we are not left in the darkness, and yeah, during these episodes.
Yeah, well, surely we believe that the government, through ESCOM, will do something to mitigate on the continued blackouts caused by load shedding.
Yeah.
And this is unfortunate because these blackouts lead to servers and telecommunications infrastructure going down and leaving people with no access to communication services, as you just mentioned now. This also poses dangers to the people's livelihoods, as someone may be ill and need emergency services during that time when there is load shedding, and they are unable to make a call for an ambulance to come and assist somebody. However, we believe that government will assist in dealing with matters such as this load shedding, but also it is important for our consumers as well to not to add to the problem, because I really have to mention that one. Our consumers or our people, through criminal acts, they act to the problem. They add to the problem because we've had cases where batteries have been stolen from towers, and people are stealing batteries. They go to the towers and take them, and we don't know where they're taking them. The operators on the other side, they keep replacing and beefing up security on all these things. So it's extra cash or extra money that is being spent to secure the infrastructure, the telecommunication infrastructure. And the problem with that is that at the end of the day, because a lot of money is being spent on securing the telecommunications infrastructure, then obviously the operators will need to regain their costs. And how do they regain their costs? They might end up charging us more because they have to cover for those costs. So maybe our people must also take part in protecting that infrastructure, because that infrastructure is very important. Because you have to make a call. Someone is studying, they have to do some research of some sort. So, but
Mm,
only to find that somebody has stolen a battery just outside of load shedding, but somebody has
mm,
stolen a battery from a tower. So it becomes a problem. So as the authority, we've been sending this message out there, encouraging communities to protect their own infrastructure, because that is their own. Should they see someone stealing those batteries or someone carrying those batteries, they must make sure that they report matters to the police, and the police are able to act on that and make sure that such people are brought to book, because it is a challenge for the country, it is the challenge for communities, it is a challenge for ICASA. So we will continue to engage with operators to try and make sure that they secure their infrastructure as well. But also, it is upon us as communities to make sure that we do the same. But on the other hand, on the load shedding side, we are watching, we're looking at how government is trying to assist ESCOM to make sure that this load shedding is dealt with and people do not experience it any further.
okay. Thank you very much. I do hope that we can see that we do have a role to play also, as as ordinary South Africans, that it is our role and we do have a role to play. And earlier on, you mentioned that, beyond the spectrum, there are other strategies that you're trying to, to put in place to ensure that we have better access to connectivity. Can you mention some of them so that we become aware and, knowledgeable about it?
Well, one of the methods that we are putting out there is something called dynamic spectrum access. Dynamic spectrum access is the most relevant as a regulatory tool to encourage efficient and effective spectrum sharing to achieve broadband access for all South Africans, and as well as a technical instrument to make it happen. So by dynamic spectrum, we also refer to those small gaps. We call them TV white spaces that can be used to roll out broadband services, especially in rural areas. In recent years, ICASA, together with its research partners, conducted some research and developed a framework for the deployment of what we call those television white spaces, television white space technology. So we published the regulations around 2018. That is, those were meant to initiate a process to develop those TV white space networks. So I remember in 2021, ICASA certified at least one secondary database provider, which made it official to deploy the networks using that technology. This is the first phase of finding innovative spectrum sharing techniques in deploying this dynamic spectrum access methods, which addresses not only our rural broadband connectivity issues, but also artificial spectrum scarcity and encourages spectrum sharing. So this is an intervention by ICASA to ensure that that spectrum, that those TV white space technology is also being used in those rural areas to make sure that people also have access over and above the licensing of high demand spectrum that we have seen ICASA having licensed recently.
Okay. I'm gonna be a bit naughty here. Are the people that are coming on board actually local entities, or are they generally still, dominated by, previously privileged and, overseas entities that come in? Do we have any local players that are actually, with that application, was it a local player or was it somebody from overseas? And it previously disadvantaged people taking advantage of these opportunities?
There's a lot of SMMEs in South Africa who have interest in using television white spaces technology. They are there, and they are the ones that we also encourage to make use of that technology. That's one. Two, in terms of licensing of spectrum, I spoke about wireless open access network, which is also another process to license the spectrum. That is also going to be made up of local SMMEs, a consortium of local SMMEs, because that's what we're trying to do to bring SMMEs to enter into the space and for them to be able to roll out services as well. And yeah, that's what we are doing. And it is also important for our consumers to follow ICASA on all social media platforms and make sure that they follow us in everything that we do. I mean, there's a lot of other licenses that people can apply for them to be able to provide a service. So like your electronic communication network class electronic communication network service licenses, people can apply for those services and roll out some Wi-Fi technology out there. So those are some of the things that are there at ICASA that people, or not just not things anyway, those are some of the licensing opportunities that people can apply for at ICASA and be able to assist in rolling out those Wi-Fi deployment of Wi-Fi services in our communities as well. That will also assist those communities in the rural areas to also have access at the same time. So opportunities are there. We just have to know how processes can be followed, and ICASA is always open for people to ask questions, and we are always ready to give people as much information as possible in terms of our licensing processes and the opportunities that are there that people can get from the authority.
Okay. This is just your personal opinion. Do you think that we do have the right skills to actually see the opportunities? Because what you've mentioned here, it's like, you've just mentioned so many opportunities, and I'm sitting here, And I'm asking myself, but do we have the right skills to actually, pinpoint and say that this is, this is an opportunity that as Karabo I can actually go into and actually make a difference?
There's a lot of people in South Africa who have the right skills and the expertise and the experience to do these things. We have a lot of ICT SMEs in the country that are there. I mean, I'm not sure about the numbers, but I know that we have more than 600 ECNS licensees in the country. So the skills are there, the expertise is there. So it's all about people taking advantage of these opportunities. And remember, not only a technical person can run such a service. You may not be a technical person, but you can get the correct skills from outside and be able to run a proper business. So those are some of the things. It's for me really. It's all about getting to learn, getting to understand what can be done, asking questions, talking to the right people, being a empowering ourselves for us to know this information, because the information is already it's out there. It just requires of us to go and get it.
Are there any training, opportunities from ICASA where a person can come and say, you know what, I want to go into the space. I don't understand the space because, as you said, it's not really a technical space. You can actually acquire the skills. Are there any opportunities, training opportunities that one can take advantage of from ICASA?
Training opportunities.
Yes,
Okay.
training opportunities.
All right. Besides, some one of the things that we do as ICASA, but we do that mainly for young people who just came out of school, out of varsity. There's a program that we put them into, and then they learn some of the how the regulatory space work. So we do have those opportunities for young people. They can come to us whenever we advertise for opportunities, and then we put them in different areas. And there are those that are going to licensing to understand how licensing works, what licensing is doing. There are those that go to engineering and technology and understand these services. But usually those are the people who already have the qualifications to learn how the regulatory environment work and how things are being done. But also, it's also important. It's not just ICASA that can assist. I mean, I believe that network operators that are out there are always willing to assist and get people to learn how the telecoms or the ICT environment works. And a lot of people can gain experiential training, information from those from those network operators. So it's all about going out there and looking for these opportunities, and they will be there. Like I said, there's a lot of expertise out there, and people are willing to share the information.
Okay, thank you very much. I am going to bother you about those so that we also create and extend awareness of these opportunities because I'm probably unfortunately because the minute I try to read the questions, at the same time, I'm gonna have feedback of sound. So what we will do is that once we have also the questions, we will forward them to you and then say, these are the questions that we got, or how do we actually ensure that we have more people rolling out and coming into the telecommunications, and actually enhancing that. And I look at, you've mentioned, some of the opportunities that we could use. And I'm looking at the 5G penetration in South Africa. And we know the challenges that, to expand it, you need, buildings that are close to one another, for it to be very successful. But then when we look at South Africa, okay, I have feedback. I have no idea why. But when we look at South Africa and how how we are generally and how we are based, we're not close together. When you are in Ghana, one house is here, one house is there. In the Eastern Cape, the same thing. That's how we build. So how are we overcoming? Do we have solutions to overcome such challenges as South Africa? Have we employed this sort of African or South African specific solutions to overcome this?
Well, with the licensing of spectrum, there is spectrum that is meant for 5G, and so the network operators will be able to roll out those services. But if A lot of places, I understand, like in rural areas, it's quite a difficult one because one house is here, the other one is somewhere else. But with the spectrum that we've licensed, we believe, we know for sure that network operators should be able to roll out services in those areas. We using a particular spectrum on those areas. So, but we have seen developments in, especially in urban areas where there's 5G connectivity. Where I am, I do have access to 5G connectivity in
Mhm.
Pretoria. So, and many other areas are around Gauteng, they have access to that. So, but that's a challenge. Hence, we spoke about equitability, equitable access than equal access. In other areas, you can't deploy 5G technology because of certain reasons, but you can deploy it somewhere else. But you must make sure that in these other areas where you can't, you must be able to make sure, as a network operator, for instance, you must be able to roll out services in those areas using another spectrum band. So those are some of the technicalities. But as a country, I believe we are still getting into this because now it took us a long time for us to license the spectrum after so many years, but we have done it
Mhm.
at the end of the day. So we will continue to do that. There are other bands that ICASA might be licensing in the near future, just to make sure that they are put out there. Interested stakeholders can apply for them and be able to roll out services. So those processes are also still coming because you remember with the auctioning of spectrum, there was another, I think it was 20 megs that was not auctioned. So that process is going to start for that spectrum to be auctioned again with other bands as well. So as this for me for us really, this is the start, and we are continuing with all these different processes to make sure that at the end of the day, the spectrum has been licensed, everyone has got access to services.
Okay, thank you very much. You know what I want to check before we proceed. How you? I know China has already started some work on the sixth generation. You know, the 6G, and I look at it and ask myself, is that does ICASA drive, the spectrum availability, or does research, even from our service providers or network providers, actually drive, the spectrum, availability, or, changes and development around the spectrum? Who drives the change here? Is it driven by, ICASA, or by our network providers?
Well, obviously, our network providers are well ahead with some of the things, some of the services or things that they want to roll out. But we must also understand the fact that ICASA is a regulator, and we operate within the framework of the law, and we use certain prescripts for us to be able to license the spectrum. And we also are part of the International Telecommunications Union, that determines some of the spectrum bands that can be licensed. So we have to follow those processes as a regulator. So right now we are continuing, like for instance, I've just mentioned now that the spectrum that is there's going to be a further auctioning of the spectrum of other bands. Some of the bands will be used, I mean, they have been identified and approved through the ITU that other countries can use them. So with the ICASA as well is going to utilize, it's going to start the process to license those bands as well. And then we get into the swing of things. We are already pushing as the regulator to license the spectrum that is available to operators or to those who require the spectrum the most, and then so that they can be able to use it. I mean, that's why we even used the best method of assigning spectrum, which is an auction, because with an auction, at least a network provider is able to bid for what they want and what they can use. Unlike
Mhm.
previously, where it was licensed administratively, where they would have certain bands, and some of them they don't use, they end up taking them back to ICASA, and then services are not being rolled out. So, from moving forward from now, we believe that things will shape up, and then people will start having access to services, and South Africa will rank better as compared to other countries, or as we continue with this regulatory interventions that we're doing as ICASA, but within the framework of the law.
Okay. Thank you very much. I just want to check something also. And I hope that we all see the potential that there is here. And with that potential, with this auctioning of the spectrum and making sure that, there are more bands, can we expect it to make a difference in, the social construct of our country, specifically on job creation? Can the auctioning of the spectrum actually change, or increase or create any jobs?
Well, chances are that it might create jobs because remember, there's a need for technicians. There's a need for a lot of other services that network operators will require after utilizing when they start utilizing the spectrum. I mean, more capacity in terms of the rolling out of services and covering the areas which they didn't even cover before. So there is that empowerment that is going to happen or that needs to happen along the way. So we believe that it will make a difference in a country, and a lot of people might get opportunities from that. And besides that, with the rolling out of spectrum, remember some of the obligations that some of these licenses go with obligations. I mean, the connection of schools, the connection of schools, the connection of police stations, the connection of tribal authorities in our rural areas, the connection of hospitals. So there is that those are some of the obligations that we are putting into this license that operators must ensure, especially in our rural areas where our traditional leaders do not have access, but they are there representing the communities. But how do we then connect the tribal authorities so that the people in those local rural areas are able to also have access? So those are some of the things that we're putting in place and to make sure that access is granted in all spheres.
Okay, thank you very much. This is a very. I hope somebody else will say, I want to know more. I want to know how I personally can actually contribute to a solution that can be plugged in, or when we look at these things, we must move away from, you know, um, what I want, but what we can also offer as a solution. And then, just as we are going towards wrapping up, I wanted to find out about the ecosystem. How are we making, which mobile technologies are we using to ensure that there's more efficiency, beyond the spectrum? We spoke about the spectrum, but which other mobile technologies are we using to actually make sure that there's more efficiency?
Yeah, no, earlier on I spoke about the use of dynamic spectrum access and the television voice-based technology that can be used. So those are some of the those that is one of the methods in which we can promote efficiency and of the infrastructure of the rollout of the spectrum, and that is also important for rural connectivity as well, because yeah, this is quite important. So that is one of the other ways over and above just the deployment of high demand spectrum, but the use of television white spaces is one of them, and then it has proven to work so far. So people can look into that as well as another method. But as the authority will continue to do a lot more research and make sure that we enforce compliance, we monitor what is happening out there, and where there are issues, people can be able to come to us, and we'll be able to touch base with these network operators, or even if they contravene the law, we can even take them to task and take them to a tribunal called the Complaints and Compliance Committee, so that we can deal with any contraventions and make sure that our people are able to have access to services.
Thank you very much. I've got two, I'd say maybe possibly naughty little questions that I might have. Government is one of the biggest employers in the country, but to get service from government, you still need to use, data. And I was wondering how come the regulator maybe has perhaps not said to government, or why to say, what, if I'm gonna go into a website of the government or use an app that is used by government, it must be zero rated, and this must be government wide. Why hasn't this happened?
Well, when COVID hit the country in 2020, ICASA licensed what we call the temporary radio frequency spectrum. So that's one of the obligations, was to ensure that government services are zero rated, especially your Department of Health, the Department of Education, all the education websites are zero rated, and a number of other obligations regarding that. So those will continue. Those will continue to be utilized. Of course, government services must be free. I mean, somebody must be able to apply for a job in government without spending their data. I mean, it's a fact. So those are some of the things that are on the radar. That we are also having. That's why our education site, Department of Health website is zero rated. People can download their vaccination certificates for free. They don't have to pay for that. So there are those services that are currently happening, and we will also continue to look into these methods as the authority to ensure that those obligations remain and they are in their licenses, so that the South Africans can also have access without even having to pay certain fees, especially on in relation to government services.
Okay. I'm really looking forward to that, where completely government wide, nothing, we have free access to, these digital services for every single thing that we might need from government, whether you're checking your ID, how far it is, whether you're checking, even just as you said, applying for a job, the most basic thing in South Africa that we go through the most, where somebody spends more than 5,000 just looking for a job, or monthly. It's something that we must look at, or also even support, portals, job portals, like, I don't want to promote any portals, but your jobs must be actually be accessible to anybody that needs them, instead of them spending a lot of money. And then I wanted to find out, we had a sort of like a disclosure, a self-disclosure legislation which was found to be unconstitutional, where people can buy SIM cards, and they're supposed to be registered to a name, and all of that. And that was later on, being found to be unconstitutional. Is there anything that has been done along those ways, looking at how, if we look at cyber crimes, the growth in cyber crimes, and we look at what is happening, globally, just generally, and even how can we actually, is there anything in the pipelines to actually address this, to make sure that we do have legislation now in place that will be constitutional? We've seen how, in Nigeria, where MTN was forced to shut down SIM cards that cannot be attached to a name. So is there anything in the pipelines in South Africa for that?
Well, the case that you're referring to, it relates to RICA,
Yes.
and RICA is out of the purview of ICASA. But what the ICASA is doing right now with the draft numbering plan regulations that we published, in those regulations, is the same regulations that are talking about, the end user and subscriber service charter regulations, and those that deal with data. There's another regulation that we are reviewing called the numbering plan regulation. So that regulation deals specifically with that matter. Where one of the things that we are proposing is to link a SIM card to biometric data. So I know this issue, people are trying are trying to put it out there as if ICASA is looking for people's personal information. ICASA is not looking for people's personal information. What we are saying is that we have what we call the number portability, where you can put your number from one network to the next. And there has always been some criminal acts that have taken place in that regard, where a number is being ported and you are not aware, and you are the one that the number is assigned to, but somebody has ported the number, or somebody has done a SIM swap without you knowing, and somebody has asked for money from other people, defrauded other people using your number, and you were not aware. Those kind of things. So what we are saying in the draft numbering plan regulations is that, how about these these SIM cards being linked to biometric, somebody's biometric data. The SIM card is assigned to you as Karabo, but now it has to be linked to you. Should there be anything, then we know who the SIM card is assigned to because we've got their information. So the intention there is to deal with these fraudulent activities that are taking place where people can just go and do anything that they want and just do some sim swap and defraud other people. So it's one of the ways to deal with that type of criminality. So that process is also out there for public consultation, and we still require our stakeholders to come and make their submissions in that regard so that the ICASA can be able to take the correct decision in line with trying to deal with the criminality that is happening out there. It happens a lot during December when people lose their numbers because somebody decided to do a SIM swap and all that. And we always give out information to people. We issue statements, we issue educational leaflets for people to be aware and not to add and not to subscribe to just about anything out there that will end up compromising their numbers or compromising their information for people to use. So those are some of the things that we are looking into, and they're all in the pipeline.
Okay, thank you very much for that conversation. And Tatelwate said we must greet you. He worked with you at Letlhabile Community Radio years
Sure.
ago. Yes. uh, he is watching also. So, yeah.
Okay.
And with
Okay.
that, thank you very much for a very, very informative session. I presume next time we have a conversation, possibly we would then have somebody who would say, you know what, I've got a solution that we can bring about, and I would want to talk to Mr Paseka or talk to ICASA or present to ICASA as a whole. I have a solution, especially in South Africa, and that we must push for us to coming up with innovative solutions.
Mm.
But that being said, I would love you to just say, your parting shots and, just to wrap up, the whole conversation and what you want us to take from this specifically.
All right. At the end of it, okay, Ntatulwate. Yes. And then at the end of it, I'd like to say, as South Africans, let's follow ICASA on all social media platforms. Let's not uh, hesitate to ask questions if there's anything that we want to know from ICASA. There's a lot of services that ICASA is offering that people may not be aware of, or they are aware, but they just don't know how to go about it. Just give us a call, check our website, follow us on social media, so that you can have as much information as possible. Right now, we are busy with the process to license additional community radio stations. The closing date is the end of June 2022. I know a lot of communities want to apply for those licenses and have their own community radio stations in those areas. They can still do that. The information is out there. But also, Karabo, what is also important is that, ICASA is a operates within a certain framework of the law. So if it operates there, it's important for people to read the documents that ICASA is publishing and follow what is in the document. Because sometimes people don't get this information, or they think there's a red tape within ICASA, only to find that it's them that are creating a red tape. They don't read the documents that we publish and understand what is required. At the end of the day, they're unable to get those licenses that would have empowered them, simply because they did not go through the documentation that is straightforward. So those are some of the things. If there's a process that is out there for people to take advantage of or to apply, don't hesitate. Call, ask questions, get clarity before you make any submission. Then you know exactly where you stand in terms of what you want. So ICASA is there, and we are regulating in the public interest. And when there are issues in terms of anything that we regulate in the ICT space, come to us, lodge complaints. Let's see how we can assist, because it's our job, it's our duty as the regulator to ensure that we empower South Africans with information in our regulatory space for them to know and understand what is right, what their rights are, to know their rights and understand them from that perspective. So let's go out there and make sure that we share that information with other people.
All right. Thank you very much. I honestly look forward to having cheaper data prices. I actually looking forward to, making more inputs and making sure that we do build a better country. With that, we'll see you again next week on Tech Tuesday when we will tackle another topic. And thank you very much, Mr Paseka, and for making us see that there are opportunities and it's only up to us to make sure that we take advantage of these opportunities and we use them for our own advancement and and empowerment. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Ke a leboga, go menagane.